This is Jeff Kassel, Matt. Hi, how you doing?
Oh, Dr. Jeff Kassel. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was listening to your show. You seem to think that the Supreme Court is not going to force Trump to turn over all these records.
Yeah, I don't think they will. Why? What do you think?
Really, I think there's Supreme Court precedent that is going to force them to. I don't even think they're going to hear the case because
Really?
The two lower courts have already authorized that these records have to be turned over. Let me mention why. There was something that happened, if you remember, during Mueller's investigation. They looked at Manafort's financial records,
Mm-hmm.
and they looked at that pretty closely, and they made him forfeit most of his assets, and they called them ill-gotten gains.
Yes.
He had a lot of tax problems because he never reported the income from Ukraine,
Right.
and he ended up losing quite a bit. I don't know if he lost everything, but and pretty much the same thing happened with Michael Cohen.
Yes. That is true.
And he not only went to prison, but he had unreported income, and they take that very seriously. But and so Mueller, he followed the money in the case of those two guys, and also in the case of Mr. Gates, who has not yet gone to jail. He's asked for no jail time, but we don't really know what's going to happen to him. He pretty much fully cooperated, but they followed the money.
Yeah.
But in Trump's case, they didn't. You noticed that, right?
They didn't follow the money?
No, I mean that's how you kind of prove misconduct. You look at the sources of money. So when the House started these inquiries, they were looking for the sources of money that Trump was using. For example, he bought that Scotland golf course for cash, and I think he had over $200 million into it. That's a lot of cash. Usually developers use borrowed money.
Right, right.
And if you remember, both of Trump's sons at one point told other people that they're getting their investments from Russia. Do you remember hearing that?
I do remember that. Yes, yes.
Yeah. And then about 2 months ago, there was a report by Lawrence O'Donnell. He only had one source for the report, and he said the report came from someone inside Deutsche Bank.
Yes.
And that the loans from Deutsche Bank, which Trump did not repay the last loan, and then they loaned him more money, Lawrence O'Donnell said his source told him that oligarchs were basically the co-signers of all these loans.
Right, right. Now, he did end up, because I guess he didn't clear any of that with NBC, just to be fair. And then
That's right. He said that he should have had a second source and he shouldn't have reported it.
Right, and then we didn't hear another thing about it. There was no follow-up that I'm aware of.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was nothing further about it. But, of course, a lot of people believed it because it makes so much sense.
Right.
It would explain Trump's loyalty to Putin.
Mm-hmm.
It would explain his interest in having some kind of financial tie to Russia. It would explain why he's never had a harsh word for Vladimir Putin, despite all the harsh words he's had for everybody else, including nearly every ally, leader of the allied countries with the United States.
Yes.
And people just assume that this happened because Trump is an authoritarian. But I guess what Lawrence O'Donnell was trying to say is he had a source inside Deutsche Bank who claimed that money was being laundered through Deutsche Bank by Russians to Trump. Mm-hmm. In the form of Deutsche Bank loans. Now, if this actually happened, that's a pretty serious violation.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it surprised me that these articles of impeachment went forward without the Supreme Court making a decision. And now, I'm sure they can amend these articles of impeachment, but without the Supreme Court making a decision about those financial records from Deutsche Bank and his accountants And they want to go back 10 years. And I'm sure there's a treasure trove of information. New York State wanted to see the records because they thought that when he made that payoff to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, they thought that came out of business funds when it was, really not a business expense.
Right.
And I think there was, probably $250,000 involved there, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, so do you think the Democrats moved too quickly with the impeachment because there's so much more? Because once this is done, and
the financial records are gonna they're gonna tell something, as well as the tax records.
Yeah.
If you remember, they actually had some kind of record indicating that a payment had been made to Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, and it was signed by Donald Trump.
Right.
And it looked like it was a business account.
Yeah.
So, you're too young to remember this, but there were also very similar charges made against Richard Nixon.
Oh, about that kind of thing specifically. I didn't realize that.
About income tax evasion.
I didn't know that part
and
of it.
And I don't remember whether that made it into the articles of impeachment, but I know that he was heavily fined, and he was forced to pay back a lot of money to IRS.
I didn't realize
back in those days, the whole campaign financing law thing was a lot less stringent than it is today.
Yeah.
So those financial... I thought it was very strange that Mueller completed his report without obtaining financial records, and it didn't even look like he tried to obtain them.
Right. I know a lot of people were surprised by that. Yeah, but he may have felt... did he ever really explain that? Wasn't it just that he just
No,
felt
he never explained it, and it never seemed to come up.
Yeah.
I read the report, and there was really nothing in there about Mueller trying to get financial records for Trump. Because, if you're looking for a connection between Russia and Trump to explain the behavior of people in his campaign, you would want to know that. You would want to know if there was money flowing from Russia to Trump that would explain his loyalty to Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And during the, right up until the inauguration, not the inauguration, but the nomination of Donald Trump, the Republican platform had been changed, and
that's right.
There was something in the Republican platform about helping Ukraine with weapons so they could defend themselves, but that was removed.
Right, Paul Manafort,
and it was removed because of the influence of
Manafort,
of Trump operatives.
Yeah,
I forget who was involved in that. It may have been Manafort.
It was.
May not have been.
It was. It was because I remember that coming up, and it was Manafort who he was still in the job as Trump's campaign chairman at the time of the convention, and I remember Manafort's name did come up. Yeah,
the Supreme Court ruled in the Nixon case because they were trying to get the Watergate tapes.
Yeah,
the tapes from Richard Nixon's office, because during the hearings, it finally came out that there were recordings of nearly every conversation that went on in the Oval Office.
Yeah,
and so Nixon refused to turn them over, and the Supreme Court insisted.
Yeah.
And I think it was a unanimous vote.
Right.
So these kinds of records, a chief executive will claim executive privilege, but in the case of oversight, in the event of an impeachment, in the past, the Supreme Court has sided with Congress for subpoenaing those records.
So there is
the Supreme Court may not hear that case. There's been two lower courts that ruled that these records have to be turned over to authorities. So if the Supreme Court doesn't touch this case, because there's already been a very similar ruling by the Supreme Court about personal records, not just the Watergate tapes, but other personal records as well, because Nixon tried to stonewall it just like Trump is doing.
Yeah. But
he did permit his people, I think, to testify during the Watergate hearings. He didn't try to stop them.
Right.
So the Supreme Court's going to be hearing a number of cases.
Yeah.
I think but the ones you cited really have to do with the financial records and his business records.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the great failure of the Mueller report, because if you're going to try to establish a motive for Trump's loyalty to Russia, you would want to see whether Russia is paying him, is buying his loyalty.
Right. Well, also, too, I part of why people are so suspicious, of course, is, who was continuing to fund Trump? Who was continuing to loan him money when, and this is why, all the talk about and the suspicion about the oligarchs, because Trump, as he himself has said, he's the king of debt. It got to a point where no American banks were going to loan him money anymore.
That's right. There may have been a small amount of lending that was heavily collateralized, but basically banks didn't trust Trump because he stuck them with the bills from his gambling operations in Atlantic City. And those operations were considered basically money laundering operations. And Deutsche Bank itself has been laundering money for Russians for decades. And the CEO of Deutsche Bank was fired, of course, when they were charged with money laundering for Russia, and he became the CEO for Cyprus Bank.
Okay.
And Cyprus Bank, of course, is a lot of wealthy Russian oligarchs that have money in that bank.
Okay.
And it's considered a pretty crooked bank, and they're laundering money.
Okay.
And Wilbur Ross was one of the managing partners of Cyprus Bank.
Oh, okay.
And he's in the, so there was a Russian connection even in the Commerce Department.
I didn't realize that. That's
fascinating. Most people have not heard that.
Yeah.
But there's Russia's fingerprints are all over the Donald Trump, Flynn, Manafort, Gates. There's just a lot of Russians involved with these people. Now, I don't know if you spent any time watching what happened in the Senate this week, but in the Senate, they were attacking the dossier.
Yes.
And they kept saying it was paid for by Hillary Clinton. But originally that dossier was paid for by a Republican who was running against Trump. They were using it to get negative information about Trump. And some of that information came out. But then it got shopped to Hillary Clinton. So there was a transfer of money from the Clinton campaign to Fusion GPS.
Right.
And they have just come out with a book. I don't know if you saw that.
No. And
I actually took a look at it. I almost bought it, and they were making the rounds and doing interviews, and they said that almost nothing in the dossier had been disproved.
Right. Right.
But in the Senate hearing, they said that basically a lot of the dossier was considered unreliable information.
Oh yeah, they call it the dirty dossier. Yes.
Yeah. In the dossier, I don't think they alleged that there has been a money transfer from Russians to Trump. But to me, Trump looks like somehow he's been compromised. And this is a man who is very willing to make payoffs.
Right.
We know that from Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels.
Right. That's
so the
true.
question is he a guy that would take a payoff?
Right.
And if you start thinking about what Hillary Clinton did with the foundation, she really pioneered the use of selling government favors as Secretary of State. And when she did favors for various people and countries, massive donations were made to the Clinton Foundation. Well, there was never an investigation of that.
Right.
There was a book by a guy named Schweitzer called Clinton Cash. And then it was made into a documentary by Bannon.
Yeah, Steve Bannon, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that documentary?
No, I've seen it floating around online, but I've never actually watched it. I mean, I'm a little...
It's still on YouTube. It's still there.
Do you think...
it's actually worth a look.
Yeah.
Because the information if it's true, Hillary Clinton should be in prison.
Well,
and there were a lot of allegations when she became Secretary of State and looked like she was going to be running for president. Bill Clinton's speaking engagement fees doubled or tripled.
Yeah. Well,
so there was a lot of money being directed at the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation, and I was always wondering why there was no investigation of that.
Well, Jeff,
there was noncompliance with income tax regulations, and there were many audits of the Clinton Foundation, but nothing ever really came of it.
Well, Jeff,
but what was disclosed was that Saudi Arabia got a squadron of F-16s, and they made a $25 million contribution to the Clinton Foundation soon afterwards, or right around the same time.
Yeah.
Same thing with Kuwait and Qatar and other countries as well. But the Clinton, that's worth watching, Clinton cash.
But Jeff,
if it's not true, it is actionable as libel.
Jeff, let me just say though, let your heart not be troubled, because our president, Donald John Trump, did say that he was going to put Hillary Clinton in prison. He just hasn't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, and he didn't do it, did he? I always found that strange.
He might need a second
term. I wondered why the Clintons never got investigated for the, with all that money flowing into the foundation. And I wondered if that foundation was possibly a CIA front.
Really?
They sometimes have a business that's loaded with cash that they use to fund clandestine operations. United Fruit, for example, was a CIA front business, and a lot of that cash went into destabilizing certain dictatorships in South America. The CIA's got a long history of unscrupulous behavior, and I don't know why anyone would trust them, or the FBI for that matter, because we know the FBI has been involved in a lot of unscrupulous things. But when the Mueller investigation didn't demand Trump's bank records, I'm sure they had access to his income tax records.
Really? You think so?
I mean, they probably could get that.
Yeah.
So you kind of wonder why that didn't happen.
But do we know for a fact, because I can't remember now, so refresh my memory, because it sounds like you remember more of this than I do. Did Mueller explicitly say that they didn't look at any of that? Because I know they shared some things with the state of New York, right? With their attorney general's office, because they have their investigation.
I don't believe they did. I think Congress was hoping that the state of New York would get some of Trump's records, his income tax records.
Yeah.
And they subpoenaed them, but that case is now in front of the Supreme Court. Two lower courts have ordered Trump to turn every record over.
Yeah.
And so it now is in front of the Supreme Court, and it would be very strange if they decide that Trump doesn't have to turn over those business records, because those records might, in light, if Lawrence O'Donnell from MSNBC is getting information about from an insider in Deutsche Bank claiming that these loans that Trump is getting they're basically laundering money through pretend lending that he doesn't have to pay back, and they're going to pay back Deutsche Bank.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do. Oh yes. Oh yes.
So, I mean, if Lawrence O'Donnell knows that, surely the intelligence agencies in the United States suspect something's going on, because Deutsche Bank has a long history of money laundering for the Russians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this would not be a surprise.
Right. Right.
This would be the first thing they would look at.
Right.
It would be the first thing I would look at it if I was an investigator.
Yes.
And so if the Supreme Court kind of shuts this down, this is going to mean that not only is the DOJ now compromised with Barr as the Attorney General, it means the Supreme Court is now corrupted.
Yes.
And so this is extremely troubling.
Yes. No, I
mean,
agree.
These are the issues that bother me far more than the Ukrainian pressure that Trump was putting on the president of Ukraine. It doesn't surprise me that Trump would try to do something like that because he does it practically every week
right.
to somebody. He tries to intimidate people.
Right.
That's who he is.
Yes.
He's a bully. He tries to push people around to get what he wants.
Yes.
But he doesn't try to push Vladimir Putin around.
Nope.
And Vladimir Putin, if he's been authorizing money to an oligarch to go to Trump, he's got every record that he needs to blackmail Trump.
Yeah. It is.
So, I mean, we might be looking at pretty wide-ranging corruption involving not only the DOJ, which never investigated the Hillary, or I think there was an investigation at one time, but nothing ever came of it. I heard that there had been an investigation opened by the Southern District of New York into the Clinton Global Initiative, but nothing ever came of it.
You know what?
And when you got massive donations from Arab countries that the United States has done favors for, that doesn't look very good. That looks like a quid pro quo.
Stefan in the Facebook live chat is agreeing with you about the Clinton Foundation. Even Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, who's he's a pretty liberal guy, but even he has said that they should be investigated. What occurs to me though, Jeff, is why, if this is all true, let's assume that it's all true, Trump and with Putin and the Russians and everything. Why would he, knowing all of that, why would he risk running for president and potentially winning the presidency if all of this makes him, because obviously this makes him very vulnerable to...
Well, exactly. I've wondered that myself. Trump is not a complete fool, but the problem with Trump is he's just addicted to publicity, and his main goal every day is to be the front page story on the media he claims to despise because everything they write is fake.
Right.
So maybe his impulse to be the center of attention overrode his good sense. It wouldn't be the first time that people make a mistake. Looking back on it, they claim, "Hey, I never should have done this."
Right.
I've taken jobs, for example, and it looked a little bit shaky, and I should have backed away from it, but I did it.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes it was kind of a lousy outcome.
Yeah.
And so Trump ran for this. You for a long time claimed that you never thought he expected to win.
Right.
And he was just using it to promote his business.
Right. I still think that. Yeah.
It didn't work out that way, and frankly, he had a pretty good campaign. He just annihilated the other 15 or 16 Republicans that were running against him.
Yeah.
They just got squashed in the debates. They didn't know how to deal with him.
Right, exactly.
So it looked like he was trying to win, to me.
Right, yeah. Well,
and, of course, Hillary Clinton was not a great Democrat candidate.
Right.
A lot of people didn't vote for her because they thought she was a crook.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
And so Trump looked like the lesser of two evils to many people.
Yeah.
But it always bothered me that in the Mueller report, there was no attempt to follow the money. If you were trying to establish some kind of reason for a close relationship between Russia and Trump, that's the first thing you would do. You would look at the money to see what the connections are, and they didn't do it.
Well, and I would suggest Occam's razor would suggest that the scenario that you've laid out is the most likely. It all sounds...
I don't just think that Russia is paying Trump off. I think there's a chance other countries are too.
Really?
When you think of what a president can do for a country like Ukraine.
Yeah.
They've got oligarchs. They were willing to pay Hunter Biden money to get the attention of Joe Biden and Barack Obama. Yeah. Because that's how business is done in those countries. They don't really consider it being all that wrong.
Right.
And that in itself is not wrong. It's just the optics are very bad.
Yes.
But there are oligarchs that are quite wealthy because Ukraine and Russia, they were the same country for 500 years.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
These were areas that really didn't have borders, and those borders kept changing, and Russia pretty much controlled Ukraine. But Ukraine, for example, they could have made a payoff to somebody.
Yep.
But, most American politicians would be afraid to accept it because of the risks involved.
Right.
But Trump is not someone that really can do the arithmetic when it comes to risk. This guy takes tremendous risks.
Yes, he does.
And he does it nearly every day.
He's walking that wire, baby. He's walking that wire.
and you're right. He had a pretty nice life. Running for president of the United States is probably the worst thing he ever did. Because it opens him to scrutiny. And all of these issues are eventually going to be looked into.
Yep.
I don't know whether you saw that New York Times story. It was over a year ago, but they uncovered massive tax evasion and tax fraud by Donald Trump and his relatives when it came to inheriting his father's money.
Oh, yes. And that $1 million loan that he claimed to get from his dad, turned out he got a total of, I think, $430 million or something like that.
It wasn't, Trump just lies about everything.
I know.
So, he's got a long history of tax evasion and tax fraud.
Yeah.
So, the special counsel knew that. That information came out. It was the biggest story. It was the longest story that the New York Times had ever written.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It took a while for me to go through it. It's still on the net. You can still see it. And that story is not blocked. There's no paywall to get to that story.
Yeah.
Anybody can see it, whether you subscribe to the New York Times or not.
Right.
So Mueller knew about that. And people that successfully get away with tax evasion, I think they continue to do it.
Right.
Which is why anybody sensible would want to take a very, very strong look, a very complete look at the tax records of Donald Trump.
Right. Well, Jeff, listen, we are rapidly running out of time, so we got to...
Okay, I'm sorry I took up the time, but it just kind of interested me the way you were talking about the Supreme Court, and I think there's a very good chance that they are going to allow those records to be given to the people that have subpoenaed them.
I hope so.
That's my opinion. But we don't know. We're going to find out very soon. They're going to rule on it.
Yes.
But I know you're running out of time. I just thought I'd throw my 2 cents in here.
All right, my friend. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the call.